welcome to Black Spring on this Tuesday. Now, today I have a bit of a story that comes from a response from the Minneapolis Mayor, Jacob Frey. Now, this would be a response to the amount of activism and the amount of calls from the general public as well as other government leaders on the subject of defunding the MPD, that would be the Minneapolis Police Department. And once again, I'd like to thank everybody for joining me on this segment of Black Spring with Autumn.
Us this morning, we just showed that video of you, and we heard about what the council is deciding to do right now. So will you veto a council resolution to dismantle the Minneapolis Police Department?
Let me be clear. I am for massive structural and transformational reform to an entire system that has not for generations worked for black and brown people. We have failed them, and we need to entirely reshape the system. We need a full-on cultural shift in how our Minneapolis Police Department and departments throughout the country function. Am I for entirely abolishing the police department? No, I'm not. And so over the coming days and weeks, I'm looking forward to working with council and talking with them about deciphering what particularly they mean when they say ending and abolishing. And I'll be talking with them directly.
Well, they were very clear last night. This has to be the beginning of the end of the police department. You also have people like Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who represents Minneapolis, saying the police department is rotten to the core, that it can't be reformed. They believe it has to start from the ground up.
Well, and in looking from the ground up, I look to our chief, Arredondo. This is someone who literally sued the police department for racial discrimination. This is someone who's chock full of integrity and has been doing the very hard work to get that transformational reform, and now he's our chief. I do support him, but let me be clear. There are so many areas where both mayors and chiefs, elected officials and otherwise, have been hamstrung for generations because we can't get that necessary culture shift because we have difficulty both terminating and disciplining officers and then getting that termination or discipline to stick. And so let me be very clear. We're going after the police union contract, the arbitration provisions that mandate that we have arbitration at the end of the process, and oftentimes that reverts the officer right back to where they were to begin with. We need to be able to have the culture shift, and if we're going to do that, it also means we need to have the ability to discipline officers to begin with.
Okay, those are some of the changes you're calling for. Is there room for a compromise here with the protesters who are saying dismantle the police department? Just lay out what a compromise might look like and how you're going to get them to accept it.
I don't want to speak for the peaceful protesters in Minneapolis. I can only speak for myself and the vision that we have for the police department, which requires massive structural reform.
I'd like to thank everyone for joining me on this segment of Black Spring. Now here we have a response, and from what you can tell quickly, you don't see a lot of response in this situation. You don't see solutions. You have, let me be clear, I'm for X, Y, and Z. But he also offers, or he cites, reasons or excuses as to why officers haven't been able to be subject to proper disciplinary actions. He's blaming the police unions and contracting rules, and he's mentioning all of these things that are internally negotiated. When you start talking about unions and collective bargaining agreement, well, who does an actual negotiation for those actual agreements? If this has been such a problem, if it's an overwhelming evidence that you have a problem with police unions, well, someone is doing those negotiations. you don't have he does not offer an actual plan. He's kicking the can down the road and saying he's going to go after the police unions and presumably a contract agreement or collective bargaining agreement, but he's not offered a solution in his actual response. However, this is the vulnerability that I see in a situation like this. We have seen, of course, other examples of police force or police use of undue force. We've seen those examples throughout the country, and we've seen them in other metropolitan areas. But the vulnerability is when a mayor like Frey comes to the table with no actual solution and projecting that he's going to go after unions. Well, that equals a delayed response. And unfortunately, with the amount of radical activists and protesting, and of course you have a congresswoman from this state, you have an overwhelming amount of diversity and cultural groups represented in this area. And unfortunately, when you are not clear, as he says, let me be clear, if you are not clear what you're working on or what actions are actually going to be taken to mitigate the situation, you're at risk of the radicals taking it upon themselves and injecting their own idea of law. And that's where I believe the vulnerability could be a cultural shift. The cultural shift that I would be concerned about, or that many might be concerned about, it wouldn't look like an American law at all. So let me know what you think in the comments. Is this a situation in which this mayor is going to be able to delay a response or kick the can down the road? Or is it going to leave the door open for the cultural shift to become Sharia law? That's a culture in that community. What will come out of this confusion? What will come out of the chaos? What will come out of the radical and the activists and the violence and the looting if there's no action and if there's no clear agenda, if there's no clear resolution from their leadership? Let me know what you think in the comments. And also, if you could hit the like or the unlike button or the subscribe button, and also be sure that you hit the bell for notifications so that you stay in tune with Black Spring with Autumn. Also, just make sure you are still subscribed to the channel. And once again, I'd like to thank you for joining me on this segment of Black Spring with Autumn.